Why are higher levels of carbon dioxide a problem, and how do we know that we are causing this?
Recent observations indicate that the Earth's radiation balance has been disturbed. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have increased by nearly 50% in the last 100 years. It is now at a higher level in the atmosphere than it has been probably for millions of years, well outside the range of natural variability. Chemical analysis demonstrates that this increase is due largely to the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. How can we tell? By studying the ratio of isotopes of carbon in the atmosphere, oceans, and gas trapped in ice cores and tree rings, it is possible to find the source of the additional carbon. Now, radioactive carbon-14 is produced by cosmic radiation in the upper atmosphere and is transported down to Earth to be absorbed by only living biological material. Fossil fuels are deposits of organic carbon that are millions of years old, so carbon-14 is no longer present in it, while other carbon sources have similar amounts of carbon-14. This makes carbon-14 an ideal tracer of carbon dioxide coming from the combustion of fossil fuels. The terrestrial biosphere has less carbon-13 than oceans because plants find it easier to use the lighter carbon-12 when they convert sunlight and carbon dioxide into food. Plankton absorb large amounts of carbon-12 from the oceans. When they die, they sink, leaving the top layers of the ocean richer in carbon-13, especially in stratified conditions. And this is also reflected in the skeletons of surface-dwelling species. As each source has its unique isotropic fingerprint, scientists can figure out how much in a given sample of air comes from each source. They use this to study in detail the carbon cycle and the strength of each source and sink of atmospheric carbon dioxide. If no action is taken to curb these emissions, carbon dioxide levels will continue to rise, taking global temperatures with it. The difference between the middle of an ice age and warm periods in between is only about 5 or 6 degrees centigrade, and this is as measured from ice core data at the poles. Global average temperatures vary by about half of those at the poles. So, associated with the likely warming in the 21st century will be a rate of change of climate equivalent to say half an ice age in less than 100 years. Adapting to this will be difficult, for humans in particular. Let's talk about the effect of vegetation on carbon dioxide levels, and let's talk about a few feedback effects. As there is more vegetation in the northern hemisphere than in the southern, a minimum of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere occurs each year in the northern summer, which is the growing season for plants. It increases in the winter as the vegetation dies away. This variation is seen clearly in the levels of carbon dioxide every year. So the effect of vegetation on carbon dioxide levels can be demarcated. Of course, the overall increase in levels that is happening year on year is also seen. Only half of the excess carbon dioxide that we release stays in the atmosphere. The rest is taken up by land and oceans. But the ability of land and oceans to absorb and hold carbon dioxide gets compromised by global warming, leading in turn to more warming. This is what is known as a feedback effect. Let's talk about a few of them. A positive feedback effect, whereby some global warming leads to more global warming, will occur as forests die back due to the stress of climate change. Add to this deforestation and soil degradation due to excessive farming. Healthy soil stores carbon, other nutrients, and water vapor. There is more carbon stored in soil than in the atmosphere and vegetation. But these are all being compromised. The biosphere's ability to hold carbon is being compromised by global warming. Another positive feedback effect is due to water. As the earth warms a little, there is increased evaporation from the oceans. Warmer air can hold more moisture. But water vapor is a greenhouse gas that traps heat. Further, snow and ice melt causes less reflection of the sun's incident radiation. More of the sun's energy therefore reaches the earth, heating it further. Most of the heat is absorbed by the ocean, and those warm waters exacerbate the melting of ice sheets. This is happening in Greenland and Antarctica. Thawing permafrost, which represent huge carbon banks in high latitudes, built up over hundreds of thousands of years, essentially from plants that lived in the short summers but did not decay in the cold winter, and eventually became part of frozen soil, could release that carbon back into the atmosphere. This would be catastrophic. These feedback loops continue, and they are out of our control once set in motion. And what do our emissions do to the oceans? The oceans store more heat in their uppermost 3 meters than the entire atmosphere. Because they are so deep and cover 70% of Earth's surface, overall more than 90% of the excess heat has gone into the oceans, with only about 1% remaining in the atmosphere. So we may not perceive it as much. The ocean has also absorbed about 30% of the excess carbon dioxide, causing ocean acidification, which is bad news for corals and marine ecosystems. The biological pump in the oceans is responsible for moving carbon around. Through photosynthesis, microscopic plants called phytoplankton assimilate carbon dioxide and nutrients like nitrate, phosphate, and silicate into organic carbon, that is carbohydrates and protein, and release oxygen. Zooplankton are small animals that feed on them, forming an entire food chain. When they die, their debris sinks. A little of this carbon sinks to the seafloor, 1% of it, where it is buried in the sediments. It stays buried for perhaps millions of years. Oil is just reduced carbon trapped in sediments from millions of years ago. With global warming, phytoplankton populations, especially their larger varieties, struggle, likely due to ocean stratification and reduced vertical mixing of nutrients. Phytoplankton populations make up the largest living biomass in the ocean. They are crucial to ocean biology and our climate. Hence, the effect of climate change on them is being looked into in detail, even from satellite images. Carbon dioxide is also transferred through the air-sea interface. Carbon dioxide dissolves in cold water at high latitudes. High salinity, heavy cold water descends. It stays in the deeper ocean for years to centuries before the water is mixed back to the surface and warmed by the sun. The warm water releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Penetrative solar radiation warms the ocean surface, causing more carbon dioxide to be released into the atmosphere near the tropics. Now, the water between Greenland and Scandinavia, for example, is usually very cold and saline, and its sinking to low levels assists in maintaining the system of ocean currents. Warmer temperatures and decreased salinity due to the melting of ice in the Arctic and Greenland will weaken the circulation mechanism and could completely cut it off. The ocean's ability to distribute heat will then be compromised, making warm regions hotter and cold ones colder. Distribution of nutrients in the ocean will also be affected, threatening marine ecosystems as well as species on land, from polar bears to bees. Evidence from paleoclimate history shows that such a cutoff has happened at times in the past and is associated with big changes in regional climate.